Okay, in this video I am going to talk about the inline functions. Now, inline functions, table functions, and multi-statement table functions. Now, basically, when you want to create an inline function, the inline function there is only one select statement. Remember that thing. The first thing is that it has only one select statement. Inline function can accept a parameter, but you cannot do any processing with it beyond the select statement. An inline function return type is always a table. What does it mean by that it is always a table? Because a inline function would always return a table. Remember that thing. You cannot include code to test for the null value in an inline function. An inline function is much like a view. You can update using the inline functions. The rules are very similar to that of the views. Wherever possible, you should use an inline function instead of the views, because the views do not allow you to pass the parameter, while the inline function allows you to pass the parameter. That is the biggest difference in between them. They are also updatable. Views are updatable as well as the inline functions are updatable. The only difference is that a user defined function will allow you to pass a parameter. Of course, it will not allow you to do any processing with it. However, a view you cannot pass a parameter. This is basically a table valued function will return a table. A table value function can be based on a single select statement, in which case it is called a simple table valued function, or it can be based on the two or more statement, in which case it is called a multi-statement table valued function. Now, in a multi-statement table valued function, you can do some processing, checking of the nulls and other things, but both of them returns a table. A function cannot have a permanent effect on the database. In other words, it cannot run an action query against a database. Insert, delete, update cannot be run inside the function. However, if you are creating a table variable inside the function, you can use insert, delete and update to update those variables inside that function itself. Unlike other database objects, you have to specify the schema name whenever you are creating a function, a user-defined function. A user-defined function is an executable database object that contains an SQL statement. The name of the function can be around 128 characters at the maximum. You can have around 1024 parameters, input parameters in a function. Remember that thing. The return statement must be used to pass the value back to the calling program. the value that is returned must be compatible with the data type that is being specified in the return clause that is at the beginning of the function first line. However, in the case of the table valued function, there is only one data type that is being returned, that is a table variable. So you need not worry about those things in a inline function. You can invoke a table valued function wherever you feel like. You can use it as a join statement in a select statement, because whatever the table valued function is returning a table, so you can use that table as another table to join the select statement. You can always use an inline function to update the table. The same rules of the view applies to the inline function, that is the same rule of the views for the update. Now let's create some of the inline functions. After understanding the basic what those are, let's actually check it out with the object ID, and I am going to check it out with this code. If that function exists, drop it. I am using a purpose database. Now comes the main part of the SQL statement. Here it is. It says create function DBO, that is the schema name. You have to specify the schema name, and then you also have to specify the schema name for the table. Remember that thing. DBO user defined function returns author for the state. This is a normal function, as you can see. This is not an inline function. Oh no, this is okay. Let's create a function that is a inline function, table function. Okay, it says create function DBO user defined return author for state. It is passing down the first variable. As you can see, a variable has to have a @ before, and that is a character 2. Okay, this is the input parameter that is coming. It returns a table. An inline function always return a table as return. Then this is a select statement. Select author ID, author L name, author first name, phone, state, contact from DBO author where state equals to B state. That was the input parameter we have received in the function, and go. And it returns the table. Now remember, in the user defined function of the scalar function, there is only one value that is being returned, while in the table function there is going to be a whole set of table returned. That's a very big difference. Now let's go and execute this statement, and you will see that the command has been successfully completed. Now it has created that function. Now this will not work as it used to work in the scalar function. Trying to execute this will not work. The reason is the select statement is returning the whole table and not just a single value, as it was in the case of the scalar function. So you have to treat this thing as a table, because it is returning a table. So you have to use the select statement in a very similar manner as you would be using it against the table. This is how you will be doing it. Select author ID, AUL name, state from DBO function user defined, and you have passed the parameter as a CA California, and I am going to execute this select statement, and you will see that the result is being returned correctly. This is the difference between a user defined function with a scalar and a inline function which returns a table. Okay. Now, as you see, this is another variation of the same function that I have created up. The only difference is, in this case, I am assigning a default value of a null to the vState variable. Otherwise, everything is the same. There is no difference in the function. This is a variation which is with a default value assigned to the variable that is being passed. Let's create this function and see what difference does it make. Now that the function has been created, let's first test whether this really works like a table. Now if I wanted to create a table from the other table, I would use a very similar syntax, but when I am using a user defined inline function, what I can do, I can still specify the state name as well as. Otherwise, I would be using a where state equals to from the table name and where state equals to CA. Now this should work perfectly, and I should be able to see the records being created in the temp table, which is known as test, for the state of CA. Remember, the temp tables are always deleted whenever your SQL server or your connection is down and restarted. So you need not worry if you have restarted the SQL server. And this is what it is. Now let's check out whether. Now if you see from the test table, you will be able to see lot of records with the CA. Now suppose if I wanted to create a test table, which was very similar, but I just wanted to have a structure of the table, I would do it exactly like this in a very similar manner, and it should create a structure very similar to the data that is being returned from this function. Now I am going to insert the data. Now I have just created the table. It says 0 rows affected because it has just created the structure of the table. I am going to execute this statement, and it is going to put all the rows into the table. Okay, and I am now going to check it out whether this table was created or not, and it has inserted rows or not. Yes, it has the rows. The tables were created. The table was created, and it has inserted rows for the CA. Now this is how you would actually update the table using a inline table function. As you are going to see, I am going to update. I am going to pass the parameter. I am going to set the state equals to ZZ for the state equals to CA, because the records that are going to be selected are the records going to be for the CA, and I am setting the state equals to ZZ. Now let's execute it. As you can see, 15 rows has been affected because there are 15 rows that were with the state with the CA. Now if I am going to run this function and going to select for ZZ, now instead of California, all those states that were having California would be having now double Z. As you can see, the has been updated. So it is very similar to the views. You can update it, but it allows you to select the parameter. It allows you to do lot of things with the parameter. Again, I can reset it back to the same thing by setting, because 15ZZ, again I am setting it back, and again I can check it out. It is back to the CA. So far so good. Now as you can see that an inline function, we did not do any processing, though we were passing the parameter. There was no way you can actually check there was no way of checking the parameter value, what it was not, because the only statement you can have is a select that returns a table. That's it. That's the only select statement you can have when you are creating an inline table function. While if you want to do processing, if you want to have check it out what these things, then you have to create a multi-statement table value function. Now let's go and create one. Here I am going to use the PUBS database again. Again, PUBS database already selected, and I am going to select start from titles and selecting all the records from the titles. Now I am going to create a function known as show type. Okay, before creating it, I am going to check it out whether it exists. Though I will actually directly check it and try to drop it. If it doesn't exist, it will give me an error. If it exists, it will drop it. It has been dropped. Okay, this is a multi-statement table value function. In this function, you will be still returning a table, but you can do some processing inside the function. Okay, now here is the create function, the schema name, the function name, and the parameter that is being type is a variable that is being passed with the character 12, and the royalty int, which has a default value equals to null, returns at the rate title type table. Now here I have defined the table that is being going to be returned. Title ID varchar. It has to be exactly the same data type and the same length which you would be using to select the data into it. As we go, you will see it what I mean by it. As begin. Now once I have defined this table, this is a table that is being defined, that is being going to be returned by the function. Now begin. If royalty is null, you are checking the royalty for whether it is null. If it is null, where did the royalty comes from? Royalty is a parameter that is being passed. If there is a royalty being passed is null, then you do this processing, begin and end, insert title type, title ID, title type price. This is a table variable. Select title ID, these things from the title where the type equals to type n. Type is again that is being passed from the as a variable, as a parameter. Now if royalty is not null, then you do this processing, that is insert into this table variable, select title ID, type this thing is the same where type equals to type and royalty greater than equals to greater royalty end. That is how, and return and go. And this return has to be the second last statement which is returning a table. Though you don't have to specify anything, but this will be returning a table, and this is going to be the end is going to be the last statement, and then you are using to go to execute the function. Now this is how you are doing a processing. This is known as a multi-table multi-statement table valued function. Now let's go and execute this function and let us check it out whether how it works. And here we go and we execute it, and you will see that the multi-statement table value function has got compiled and has been successfully completed. Now let's run this function. Okay, in the first instance, I am trying to run it with a null value within the select statement by selecting it. As you can see, the records have been returned for all the royalty. Now in the other case, I am going to be using another parameter instead of a null, that is going to be 20, and you will see only royalty with 20 and 20 greater than 20 has been returned. This is what a multi-statement table value function can do. Again, everything insert, update, delete, whatever you were doing in an inline function, single inline function, is actually the same rule applies here also. No difference. You can do an update, you can do whatever you feel like. Though you will rarely be using a multi-statement table valued function, but it's always better to know how to write one. Okay, I'll just end it here.